Hi everyone, this video is all about SQL constraints. So SQL constraints are nothing but set of rules that we apply on the data present in the table. These rules can be applied record wise, as well as these rules can also be applied to the entire table. So any violation of these constraints automatically make that particular action aborted. So for example, if we try to insert a record into the table, so if this insertion does not satisfy this set of constraints, then automatically the insertion action will be get aborted. These constraints can be specified in two different ways. So first way is we can mention the constraints while the table creation using the create command. So if the table is created, if table already exists, we can also alter the schema of the table and we can mention these constraints using the alter command. So both of these commands have been seen in DML and DDL commands. So let us see first way of mentioning the constraints to the database table. So first of all, we have to create a table, create table name along with the column name and their respective data types, followed by the constraint name. So each and every attribute along with this data type, it should be followed by the different types of constraints. So actually we have different types of constraints in structured query language. So first one is not null constraint. Not null constraint mention that a particular column should not contain any null values, because if you forgot any attributes during insertion, by default its value is null. So in order to avoid this, we can mention the not null constraints as well as unique constraint. Unique constraints is usually used to ensure that there is no duplicate values present in the column. As well as primary key is similar to unique. Primary key also represents the unique values present in a column, as well as if I mention a particular attribute as a primary key, it should be not null. Next one is foreign key constraint. Here foreign key is nothing but a primary key of another table. Actually each and every individual table should contain a primary key. So if I consider two different tables which has two different primary keys, if I include table 2's primary key into the table 1, then it will become a foreign key. That means now there must be a relationship between table 1 and table 2, because we have stored table 2's primary key as a foreign key in the table 1. So there must be some type of referential integrity in between both these tables. Next one is check constraint. Check constraint actually is used to mention a specific condition whether that particular column met or not. For example, if I take an age should be greater than or equal to 25 for the job employee. So this is the type of constraint we can check for check constraint. As well as default constraint. Default constraint can be mentioned during the insertion. It is useful during the insertion operation, because if I forgot to insert any one of the value, this default value must be inserted into the table as a record. So first of all, we are going to discuss SQL not null constraint. This not null constraint is mentioned along with the table creation. For example, I am creating a table called person. Here we have 5 different types of attributes: PID, person ID, person last name, person first name, address, as well as varchar. Here I am taking person ID as well as last name as a not null. That means during insertion of a record into the person table, we should not insert empty values for PID and last name, because we have mentioned them with the not null constraint. Whereas we can mention the first name as well as address as well as city as a empty values, because they are not specified with the not null constraint. When it comes to unique constraint generally guarantees as that particular column does not contain any duplicate values. It guarantees us the uniqueness. For example, same creation of the table persons, the same attributes PID, last name, first name, address, as well as city. We are mentioning unique constraint for the person identifier. That means the table person should not have a person with the same ID multiple number of times. So this type of condition will be ensured by the unique statement. These unique statement can also be created if already table existed using the alter command. So alter table person. So in order to add these unique constraint to the table, existing table, we have to add a particular add statement along with the unique construct, and we have to mention the attribute name for which we are following unique constraint. So next one is a primary constraint. We have already discussed that each and every table in a structured query language contains a primary key. Primary key is nothing but it is an attribute that contains unique values, as well as these attribute values are not equal to null. Such type of attribute can be taken as a primary key. A single table can have any number of primary keys, but sometime we will consider most of the times a single attribute as a primary key. Let us consider this particular example. Here PID is taken as a primary key because a persons table contain number of persons, and we are ensuring that no duplicate person is mentioned because we are taking person ID as a primary key. So similarly, we can also use unique, but unique may contain the null values, but when it comes to the primary, it ensures the uniqueness, as well as attribute which is mentioned as a PID should not contain null values. So if the table already exists but there is no primary key, we can create the primary key using alter command along with the add constraint, as we seen before, along with the unique constraint. So next one is foreign key constraint. As we discussed before, a foreign key is nothing but a primary key of another table. It is used for creating a relationship between two tables, two schemas. Such type of relationship can be taken as an association. For example, consider the order table as same as previous with the different types of constraints, not all constraint. So if I want to include another table's primary key as a foreign key, we have to mention the foreign key along with the what type of attribute are you taking as a foreign key. So what it refers, what it references. It references the primary key which belongs to the person. So it is a primary key in the PI. This particular PID is a primary key of persons table. For example, consider the schema of the persons table. Here we have taken PID as a primary key, and this primary key PID is taken as a foreign key in the orders table, which also contain ordered ID. So ordered ID is an primary key of a orders table, whereas PID is a foreign key which belongs to the persons table. For example, consider these two tables which one belongs to order and one belongs to person. So if we observe the values of PID and order ID, we have a numerical values which refers to the same. So such type of relation can be taken as an association. So that's why we have taken PID as a foreign key in the table orders. So the check command places some type of restriction on the amount of data that we place in a attribute. That means we can specify some type of condition for each and every tuple present on a record. For example, here we have performing a check constraint for the person ID. That means the person ID should not be equal to 0. It should be greater than 0. So PID is actually a primary key. It is also a not null. Actually, we have two different types of constraints already applied to the PID. Again, we are applying the check constraint. So for each and every record insertion, this particular check will be performed, that whether the PID contain the value greater than 0. So next one is default constraint. This default constraint is mainly useful when the user forgot to insert a record. User forgot to mention the attribute of a particular record. So these attribute values generally by default inserted with the null. So if you are not required with null, we can mention the default constraint. For example, if I forgot to mention the value of CT attribute, by default it will be inserted with the sadness. We can also add this constraint after the table creation. In order to add the constraint to a table or an attribute, we have to use an alter statement along with the add constraint. in order to remove the constraints for a table or an attribute, we have to use alter statement along with the drop statement. Consider a unique constraint here. In order to add, we will use add construct along with the unique name and the attribute for which you are going to add the particular constraint. In the same, we can also drop this constraint using the drop construct, drop unique, and you have to mention the attribute for which you are removing the unique constraint. Next, when it comes to primary key, we can apply the same notation to add a primary key for an attribute, alter table and table name, and in this table we are adding a primary key which is called PID. Similarly, we can drop the same alter table persons, drop the primary key which is a PID actually, which we have to mention during the table creation, and same applies to the foreign key. While mentioning the foreign key, we have to mention the references as we seen before. So we are altering the table orders and we are adding a foreign key called PID, and this foreign key refers to a primary key called PID. So the same applies while removing the particular foreign key. We are altering the table orders and we are dropping a particular key as a foreign key. Here FK per orders is we are considering it as a foreign key and we are trying to drop it from the orders table. When it comes to check constraint, we are applying a check constraint for the PID which we have seen before. In order to remove the check constraint, we have to apply the same. Instead of we have to use drop, we are altering the persons table and we are dropping the check constraint which is applied on the check person attribute. All these attributes which we have taken is just an assumption. This default constraint can be created using alter and add construct. Here we are trying to assign a default constraint for the city attribute and its default value is sadness. So similarly, we can also remove the default constraint of a particular city attribute using alter and drop construct. So coming to the next class, all you people consider this example as an homework and try to solve it on the home, and you have to submit this particular exercise 3 hours before the commencing of the class time. So here we have an employee table that contains different types of attributes. Here we have applied different types of constraints like not null constraint, primary constraint, as well as check constraint, as well as default constraint. So we are creating an employee table with the different types of constraints. Now the question is, we have taken 4 different types of insertion statements, 4 different times. So you have to write which of the insertion statement has violating the following constraints, which of the insertion statements are not violating the constraint. If the particular insertion violates the constraint which we have mentioned here, please write about all those violations. So if you need any additional resources, you can refer these textbooks. So lots of web resources is also available. You can refer these web resources for lot more information. Thank you.